it was almost a very touching, very beautiful moment where his fellow players locked arms around him to give him privacy, to give the medics privacy, who should really be the ones who are being lauded here. We sort of say well done to an awful lot of people, but the medics are the ones who are there on standby and who are the ones who could have saved a man's life. And it's also important to say how important it is to have defibrillators in stadiums and things like that. So, it was a very odd situation. Eriksen was taken away. He was taken to hospital and stabilised. We were all delighted to hear that news when to be honest, we all thought the worst was going to happen.
And obviously there's been a lot of criticism online towards the BBC for staying with those pictures. There were some pictures shown of him receiving CPR. It was very clear, even though the players had formed a sort of human barrier around him, that he was being given CPR. They cut to pictures of his wife looking very, very depressed. Where's the line, Tom? Because the hard-faced journalist in me thinks, well, actually, if the public have been invested in actually watching this man play, and then that happening, obviously you'd want to know what was happening. You'd want to know, if you're a reviewer, what is going on. Oh my word, is he going to survive? But then obviously there is the morality of keeping the camera on someone when they are receiving such medical treatment, and when they are at that point. Thankfully he seems to be on the mend today, but gravely ill. So what do you say to that?
So the first thing I would say is, I don't think a single portion of blame can be given to the BBC for this. Not a single portion.
Why not a single portion?
Because the feed being brought to you from the stadium to the BBC and into our homes last night was not provided by the BBC. It was provided by a Danish film crew who were, they were covering the game for Uefa. Uefa passes out the international feed. It's so we don't have...
So every international broadcaster gets the same images, basically.
Yeah, it's so we don't have 100 TV cameras in a stadium at one time. And broadcasting standards can be very different across different countries. Now, one thing, the reason why I don't blame the BBC for this, yes, naturally when there's an injury, it's very simple to say they should cut away straight away and that should be that. But actually, when a very serious injury happens, especially in sports, especially when it's something like, when someone breaks an arm or someone breaks a leg or something, it's very serious. You don't see the replays. You don't see the close-ups. You don't see the action. You see establishing shots of the stadium, and then there is commentary over what's happening.
So you might see a wide shot of the treatment being
you would
given,
see a wide
but
shot.
You wouldn't see a close-up of that. But then why didn't the BBC, knowing that principle, apply that principle themselves? They didn't need to stay with the live feed from the stadium. They could have cut back, because Gary Lineker and the other commentators were in the studio. Why didn't they cut back to the studio occasionally and then just cut back to the feed when there were wide shot pictures? I mean, it's on that. I take what you're saying with the fact that they didn't have a choice over what images and what camera was showing what, but they did have a choice about whether they stayed with that live feed, didn't they?
They did, but at the same time, you don't know... First of all, you don't know what's going to come up on that live feed. The person pressing the buttons and turning the knobs for the BBC won't have been sat there and someone said they're going to perform CPR on him and you're going to get a great shot of him for TV. They don't know what's going to happen. All they know is this feed is happening. And, if that happens, by the time they've cut away, it's already happened. It's already gone. And then, yes, there is the discussion about whether they cut away again or what happens next. We don't know. But then, at the same time, these people, they're doing the best they can. In the studio, the likes of Gary Lineker, the likes of Cesc Fabregas and Micah Richards and Alex Scott, who were on the coverage last night. Could you imagine in this situation being one of them and saying someone that you likely know quite well is potentially having a cardiac incident on the pitch, and this, we never may see him again? Could you imagine being told you've got 30 seconds, cut back to you on the camera? These people will be absolutely distraught. And they, even on camera, when they did cut back to them several minutes later, they were still distraught.
I get what you're saying, but it's sort of their job. It's their job.
It is their job at the end of the day. But at the same time, if, what do you do in that situation? It's a complete catch-22. As a presenter, if I was presenting, I wouldn't want them to come anywhere near me because, yes.
But I would rather them come near me than potentially show. I mean, the moment they started doing the CPR,
I understand that.
If I was the director or if I was the editor of that show, I'd have said, right, Gary, we're coming back to you right now, because the moment because they stayed on the actual CPR being given for quite a few moments.
I appreciate that, but at the same time, if someone like Gary Lineker, consider this happened 5 minutes or so before half time, so this is the kind of prime time that the pundits and presenters are off doing comfort breaks, having off camera, and they're not in position. Pundits don't sit in position all the way through the match. They go off and they do things, and then they come back for half time and they know what's happened because they've been watching the game. Now, at this point, they might not have been able to go back to the studio because there might not have been anyone sat in position.
I take that, and I really want to know whether anything that you're hearing from either Tom or myself, is that convincing you at all? Are you feeling a bit more sympathetic towards the BBC because they didn't choose the actual pictures? To what extent should they have stayed with those pictures, gone back to the studio? It's a really interesting debate, but thankfully... good news is that he appears to be, he's talking, he appears to be in a far better condition.
Yeah, we haven't heard from him himself. We heard from his agent on behalf of his father last night that he was talking and breathing on his own. He'd left the stadium in an ambulance and was stabilised, which was great to see, or great to hear that news. And I just want to say as well, the efforts of the Danish captain, Simon Kjær, was absolutely inspirational. The man organised it in a moment where he could have absolutely crumbled. He remained as stoic as he needed. He kept his players around him, and he said, right, okay, we need to be strong for Christian right now, because if we're not, then who knows what could happen. He went over and he consoled Christian Eriksen's wife. He was the leader on the pitch and off the pitch. Simon Kjær was the absolute hero of yesterday. We talk about the medics, we talk about the
He put him in the recovery position.
Exactly.
He cleared his airways, did all the things that you do in an emergency situation.
Exactly. So he was an absolute hero yesterday. Him, Kasper Schmeichel as well, who, football fans over here will be very well aware of as well. There are a lot of situations where players can crumble, and we did see a couple of players in tears yesterday on the pitch, on the Danish side and on the Finnish side, but Simon Kjær did the right thing. He held his nerve. He did what he needed to do. Ultimately, for Denmark, it didn't work out in the way they liked. They restarted the game at the players' request, by the way. It wasn't a request by Uefa and said, you have to carry on. This was the players saying, we want to carry on. We want to finish this game. They went on. Unfortunately, Denmark lost the game to Finland. But ultimately, I think it's a day where I think the person who put it perfectly in a previous conversation was Jurgen Klopp, the Liverpool manager. He said, on days like today, football is the most important of the least important things. And I think yesterday the most important thing was the health of Christian Eriksen and the family and everything. And there's all sorts of talk of the BBC and all this thing. Well, and I think it's a perfect opportunity for people to say, to use it as ammunition against the BBC. I don't think it's not appropriate for that. It is not appropriate to talk about.
Now we've got to be